Hello everyone, I'm doing something a little different for this 5 in 5. Instead of going over 5 studies, I'm compiling a larger number of studies into 5 reasons why, and stay with me until the end, please, diversity training on its own doesn't really work, and what we can do instead. This list comes from a 2018 article in Anthropology Now titled, "Why Doesn't Diversity Training Work? The Challenge for the Industry and Academia." Corporations and other institutions offer diversity training in an effort to reduce bias and discrimination, or, in the Starbucks case framing the article, as a response to discrimination. However, hundreds of studies dating back to the 1930s suggest that anti-bias training does not reduce bias, alter behavior, or change the workplace. Increasing tolerance and reducing discrimination in schools and the workplace is obviously a good and necessary thing. I would very much prefer not to get hate crimed at my job, so we should focus on things that actually do that. There are 5 different lines of research laying out why traditional short-term diversity training seminars may fail. The first is that short-term single-instance interventions in general do not change people, or not by much and not for long. Even short-term health and safety trainings tend not to meaningfully affect people's behaviors, and those are often to try to keep you alive in hazardous environments. The second is that anti-bias training can activate and even reinforce stereotypes. The problem with getting people to recognize unconscious biases they may have is that you have to remind them that they exist. Try not to think about elephants, and then measure success by not thinking about elephants. The third is that the very presence of diversity training, or other indicators of an inclusive institution, can instill a false sense of confidence that discrimination can no longer exist. If the problem has been perceived to be solved, employees may feel more comfortable in not censoring themselves and react harshly to claims of bias. More generally, in experiments, the presence of workplace diversity programs seems to blind employees to hard evidence of discrimination. The fourth is that people tend to react negatively to efforts perceived to control them. Mandatory participation in a legal framing, "we have to do this or we'll get in trouble," can make people feel resentful and more likely to not only reject the training, but to go the other way out of spite. In experiments, white people resented external pressure to control prejudice against black people so much that they responded by increasing bias, unless they saw the desire to control prejudice as voluntary. The fifth, final, and probably most contentious line of research suggesting why diversity training might fail is that the standard multicultural messages they use, as opposed to colorblind messages, which have fallen out of favor, often leave members of majority groups feeling left out. White people can feel like they're being passed over in favor of everyone else, and often leave training feeling confused, angry, or with more animosity toward other groups. Unfortunately, when black people work with whites who take a colorblind stance rather than a multicultural one, it alienates them and reduces their engagement with their coworkers. Majority group members like white, male, straight, and cis tend not to think of those things as salient parts of their identity, so colorblind, or equivalent stances, often just mean suppressing the identities of everyone else. So, if those are problems, how can we make things better? Well, we can take steps to improve these existing diversity trainings and, more importantly, we can incorporate them into larger and more extensive programs of change. Instead of drawing attention to stereotypes, encouraging practices that increase contact with other groups seems to be far more effective at increasing comfort and reducing bias. People tend to feel more justified doing something bad if they felt like they've done something good, so incorporating moral licensing literature into training programs, reminding people that doing something good doesn't give you license to do something bad, can reinforce the idea that reducing bias is a process, not an action. When framing diversity training goals, de-emphasizing legal consequences in favor of benefits to the institution can reduce feelings of external pressure and coercion. We can make multiculturalism training feel less exclusionary to majority groups by, get this, simply including them. Majority cultures are, after all, an important part of multiculturalism, and since members of majority cultures are usually the ones most in need of exposure to and anti-bias training for others, making them feel alienated and resentful instead is the exact opposite route we want to take. But even a perfect diversity training program that definitively reduces even unconscious bias might not actually reduce discrimination. Discrimination may result from habits of mind and behavior or organized practices that are not rooted in unconscious bias alone. One of the defining characteristics of systemic racism is that it perpetuates racism even if no one within the system is intentionally racist. The key to improving the effects of training is to make it part of a wider program of change. Studies of health and safety training have proven this. Long-term change requires long-term structures. College recruitment programs, mentorship programs, and diversity task forces that analyze problems from the top down all put existing higher-ups in touch with people from different backgrounds, help them understand the contours of the problem, and seem to turn existing managers into champions of diversity. So it's not that diversity training doesn't work at all, it's that it's not effective by itself, at least not in the anemic single-day seminar format it typically takes place in today. Diversity and inclusion aren't just SJW buzzwords. They're a necessary component of a better future for everyone. Training seminars might give the appearance of addressing the problem, but they amount to little more than a PR stunt most of the time. Long-term systemic changes are needed, especially in the education system where they would be most effective. So, look forward to this conference in a few weeks where I try to convince James Lindsay why diversity in schools is not a threat to the future of our white children.